I remember the exact moment when 13 years of military service turned to ash in my mouth. It was a scorching Texas afternoon at Camp Resolute, the kind where the sun feels personal in its assault. The parade ground shimmered with heat, dust particles dancing in the air as we stood at attention. I could feel sweat trickling down my spine beneath my uniform, the same uniform I'd worn earlier that day during my volunteer shift at the VA hospital. My name is Staff Sergeant Riley Monroe, and I believed in the power of service long before I understood the politics of power. That belief was about to be tested. Monroe. The voice cut through the formation like a blade, stopping conversations mid-syllable. Captain James Mercer stood before me, his pressed uniform immaculate, his posture perfect. Unlike mine, I knew immediately what had caught his attention: the faint stain on my sleeve from a leaking IV bag when I'd helped an elderly veteran settle into his wheelchair. I hadn't had time to change before mandatory formation. "Sir, yes, sir," I responded, my voice steady despite the knot forming in my stomach. His eyes flicked to my sleeve, then back to my face with theatrical disdain. "Would you care to explain to the rest of the unit why you've decided to dishonor your uniform today?" The silence that followed felt like a vacuum. 53 soldiers held their breath around me. I was volunteering at the VA hospital, sir. There was an incident with... An incident. He cut me off, the corner of his mouth twitching. "So you prioritized your little charity work over properly representing this unit? Over respecting this uniform?" My throat tightened. "No, sir. I simply didn't have time to... Time management is a basic military skill, Monroe. One you apparently lack." He turned to address the formation. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. Some people wear this uniform because they've earned it, others..." His eyes swept back to me. "Others wear it despite clearly being better suited for mopping floors." Laughter rippled through the ranks. Not everyone. Some kept their eyes fixed forward, jaws tight but enough. Enough to burn. I stood ramrod straight, eyes forward, feeling 13 years of dedication, 3 tours of duty, and countless accolades dissolve in communal mockery. What hurt most wasn't Mercer's words I'd heard worse from him, but the ease with which he turned my service into a punchline. I'd fought twice as hard as many men on this base. Carried the same packs, run the same miles, bled on the same ground. And still, there I stood, being reduced to a stain. Just as Mercer opened his mouth to continue his public flogging, a raspy voice called out from beyond the parade ground fence. "Is that how you treat a soldier who still honors the uniform more than her own comfort?" The voice belonged to an elderly man leaning on a cane at the visitors' area. Despite his age, he stood tall, his white hair cropped in a military cut that hadn't changed in decades. His weathered face carried the quiet dignity of someone who'd seen too much to be impressed by petty displays of authority. Captain Mercer's head whipped around, irritation flashing across his face. "Sir, this is a military formation. Civilians need to..." Major Walter Jefferson, 75th Infantry, retired. The old man took a step forward, his cane thumping against the ground. "And I believe I outrank you, Captain." The name hit like a thunderclap. Every soldier at Camp Resolute knew of Major Jefferson. His name was literally on a plaque in the main hall, a decorated war hero whose tactical decisions had saved hundreds of American lives. A legend who rarely made public appearances since his retirement. Mercer's face drained of color. "Major Jefferson, sir. I apologize for the confusion. We're conducting standard discipline. What I witnessed wasn't discipline, son. It was bullying." Major Jefferson's voice carried across the parade ground without him raising it. "That soldier's uniform has a stain from helping veterans like me." "Where's yours from?" "The officers' club bar?" Someone in the ranks stifled a laugh, quickly masked by a cough. Mercer's jaw worked silently for a moment before he recovered. "With all due respect, sir, internal matters of this unit are..." "Your name, soldier?" Major Jefferson ignored Mercer, looking directly at me. "Staff Sergeant Riley Monroe, sir." He nodded slowly. "Monroe. I believe we've met at the VA. You helped organize the Veterans Art Therapy program last month." "Yes, sir." The knot in my throat loosened slightly. Major Jefferson turned back to Mercer. "Captain, I came here today to speak with your commanding officer about an important matter. I believe I'll add this incident to our discussion." He fixed Mercer with a stare that had probably frozen enemies in their tracks decades ago. "You don't even know who you just disrespected. But you will." With that, he turned and walked toward the administration building, each tap of his cane against the ground echoing in the stunned silence. Captain Mercer cleared his throat, his face flushed. "Formation dismissed," he barked, turning on his heel and stalking away. As the ranks broke, I stood motionless, processing what had just happened. Some soldiers avoided my gaze, others gave me subtle nods of support. My closest friend in the unit, Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez, approached me. "Holy shit, Riley," she whispered. "That was Major Jefferson. The Major Jefferson." "I know," I said, still watching his receding figure. "I've been reading to him on Thursdays for months." "He never mentioned who he was." Maya shook her head. "That's because real heroes rarely do." She squeezed my arm. "Mercer's going to make your life hell for this." "My life already is hell under him," I replied, finally looking at her. "What's a little more fire when you're already burning?" What I didn't know then was that the fire was about to spread in ways none of us could have imagined. Major Jefferson wasn't just making a stand. He was lighting a match that would expose years of buried injustice. As I walked back to the barracks that evening, the Texas sunset painted the sky in defiant colors of orange and red. I traced the stain on my sleeve, this small, innocuous mark that had somehow become the symbol of a much larger battle. I had no idea that by this time tomorrow, everything would change. I didn't join the military for glory or recognition. I joined because the recruitment office was the only building in my hometown of Lubbock, Texas, with functioning air conditioning and a door that actually locked. My mother cleaned motel rooms 6 days a week. Coming home with cracked hands and stories about the strange lives people lived away from home, my father drank his demons away, demons from a war he never spoke about, except in his nightmares. Our trailer park had more broken dreams than working streetlights. The military offered structure in a life that had none. 3 meals a day. A roof guaranteed. A purpose beyond survival. What no one tells you when you sign those papers is that you're not just joining a force, you're joining a family. A dysfunctional one, sometimes cruel, often demanding, but a family nonetheless. For someone who grew up watching her father disappear into a bottle, and her mother into exhaustion, even a dysfunctional family was more than I'd ever had. The morning after the incident with Captain Mercer, I woke before dawn as usual. The barracks were quiet except for the soft snoring from a few rooms down. I slipped into my PT uniform and headed out for my daily 5-mile run, a ritual that kept me sane more than it kept me fit. The base was different at 5 a.m. Peaceful, no posturing, no politics. Just the rhythm of my footfalls and the gradual lightening of the Texas sky. As I rounded the corner near the administrative buildings, I noticed a black SUV parked outside, unusual for this hour. The government plates caught my attention. Something was happening. I completed my run and headed to the mess hall, where the morning buzz was already different. Hushed conversations stopped when I entered. Eyes followed me. Not with mockery this time, but with curiosity. Lieutenant Rodriguez slid into the seat across from me, coffee in hand. Her dark eyes were wide with excitement. "You have no idea what's happening, do you?" she asked. I took a bite of my eggs. "Enlighten me." "Major Jefferson didn't just talk to Colonel Williams yesterday. He made some calls." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Big calls. Pentagon-level calls." I set down my fork. "About what?" "About a pattern of systemic leadership failures at Camp Resolute, with specific emphasis on gender-based discrimination in Mercer's unit." Maya's expression was serious now. "Riley, he's been documenting everything. Not just what happens to you to all the female officers. He's been keeping records for months." The mess hall suddenly felt too warm. That's not why I helped him at the VA. I never asked for this." "That's exactly why he's doing it. Because you never asked." Maya reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Some people see more from a wheelchair than others see from a command post. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Need to speak with you." 0900 hours. Colonel Williams' office. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of routine duties and whispered rumors. By the time I presented myself at the colonel's office, my uniform perfectly pressed and the previous day's stain scrubbed away, my stomach was in knots. The office administrator nodded at me. "They're waiting for you, Staff Sergeant. They, not he." I knocked on the door, heard the colonel's gruff enter, and stepped inside. Colonel Williams sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable. Major Jefferson was seated to his right, but it was the third person in the room who caught me off guard, a woman about my age. Maybe 35, with Major Jefferson's sharp eyes, but a presence entirely her own. She wore a civilian pantsuit that probably cost more than 3 months of my salary. "Staff Sergeant Monroe reporting as requested, sir," I said. "Standing at attention. At ease, Monroe," Colonel Williams said. "Take a seat. This is an informal meeting." In my experience, there was no such thing as an informal meeting with a full-bird colonel, but I sat anyway. "You've met Major Jefferson," the colonel continued. "This is his granddaughter, Dr. Camilla Jefferson, newly appointed Director of Veteran Affairs Outreach at the DoD. My eyes widened slightly. Director-level positions reported directly to the Secretary of Defense. Dr. Jefferson extended her hand. "A pleasure to meet you formally, Staff Sergeant. My grandfather speaks highly of you." Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct. I had the distinct impression of being evaluated. "Thank you, ma'am." "The honor is mine," Major Jefferson spoke up, his voice gravelly but strong. "Riley, I owe you an apology for not being forthcoming about my past. When I first met you at the VA, I wanted to be treated like any other old man with too many stories and not enough visitors. No apology needed, sir. There is, actually." He shifted in his seat, "because while you were reading to me and organizing my medications, I was documenting everything you and the other female officers told me about life on this base." My blood ran cold. I glanced at Colonel Williams, whose face remained impassive. "Sir, I never intended to file any official complaints. Whatever I may have said was said in confidence, I know." Major Jefferson nodded. "And I've betrayed that confidence. But sometimes, Staff Sergeant, the right thing feels wrong at first." Dr. Jefferson opened a leather portfolio. "Staff Sergeant Monroe, we're not here to put you on the spot. We're here because Camp Resolute has been selected as the pilot site for a new veteran integration initiative." She slid a document across the desk. "The Jefferson Program for Veteran Reintegration and Military Cultural Excellence." I skimmed the document, a proposal for a multi-million-dollar program that would bring veterans to active military bases for mentorship, training, and community integration. "It's based on what you've already been doing informally," Major Jefferson explained. "But with real funding, real support." Colonel Williams cleared his throat. "The Pentagon is very interested in this program, Monroe, especially after recent concerns about leadership culture at several bases, including ours." The subtext was clear. Major Jefferson's observations had landed on important desks. Captain Mercer's behavior was part of a larger problem they were now being forced to address. "What does this have to do with me, sir?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. Dr. Jefferson leaned forward. "We want you to help design and lead this initiative, Staff Sergeant. Your experience, your connection with veterans, and your—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Your resilience in the face of certain institutional challenges makes you uniquely qualified." I sat back, stunned. "I'm just a staff sergeant. This sounds like an officer-level project." "About that," Colonel Williams interjected, "there's been discussion of a battlefield commission based on your service record and recommendations." The room seemed to tilt slightly. A battlefield commission, a direct promotion to officer rank, was rare in peacetime. It would change everything about my career trajectory. "I need time to think about this," I said finally. "Of course." Dr. Jefferson nodded. "But there's one more thing you should know." She pulled out a tablet and tapped the screen. "This is security footage from yesterday's formation." She turned the tablet toward me. There I was, standing at attention while Captain Mercer berated me. The audio was clear enough to catch every word, every laugh that followed. Then came Major Jefferson's intervention. "This footage has been reviewed at levels well above this base," Dr. Jefferson said quietly. "Captain Mercer has been temporarily reassigned pending review." Major Jefferson reached over and placed his weathered hand on mine. "I told you yesterday he didn't know who he was disrespecting. Now he does." I stared at the frozen image on the screen, at my own face trying to maintain dignity while being publicly humiliated. Something shifted inside me, not satisfaction or vindication, but a quiet resolution. "When do you need my answer?" I asked. "The Jefferson program launches in 3 weeks," Dr. Jefferson replied. "We'd need your decision by Monday." As I left the office 10 minutes later, the Texas sun felt different on my skin. Not burning, but warming. Clarifying. I thought about my father, who'd worn his uniform until the demons drove him to drink them away. I thought about my mother, whose hands had been stained by honest work her entire life. I thought about the stain on my sleeve that had started all this, a mark of service that someone had tried to turn into a mark of shame. By the time I reached the barracks, I already knew my answer. The Monday morning following my meeting with Colonel Williams, Major Jefferson and Dr. Camilla Jefferson arrived with a strange sense of calm. The weekend had given me time to process everything: the humiliation on the parade ground, the surprising intervention, and the life-changing offer now on the table. I had spent Saturday running until my legs burned, thinking about what this opportunity meant. Sunday, I visited the VA hospital as usual, but this time I saw the veterans differently. Not as patients or even friends, but as partners in something that could be transformative. When I arrived at Colonel Williams' office at 0900 sharp, both Jeffersons were already there, along with 2 new faces, a Pentagon liaison, and a woman introduced as the base's legal counsel. Staff Sergeant Monroe. Colonel Williams nodded. Have you reached a decision? I stood at parade rest, my freshly pressed uniform now immaculate. Yes, sir. I'd like to accept the position with the Jefferson program, pending details we need to discuss. The tension in the room dissipated slightly. Dr. Jefferson smiled, opening her portfolio. Excellent. Let's begin with the framework. She laid out documents on the table. The program will initially integrate 30 veterans as mentors across different departments on base. Each will be paired with active duty personnel for knowledge transfer, cultural preservation, and leadership development. I scanned the organizational chart. And my role would be? Program director, she replied. You'd oversee the entire initiative, reporting directly to me and base command. The battlefield commission we discussed would promote you to first lieutenant. My breath caught. It was one thing to hear it mentioned, another to see it laid out officially. That's a significant jump, ma'am. Warranted by your service record, the Pentagon liaison interjected, and by the specific requirements of this position. Major Jefferson spoke up. Riley, this isn't charity or favoritism. I've reviewed your file thoroughly. 3 tours, multiple commendations, leadership in crisis situations. You've earned this through merit. I nodded slowly, still processing. And Captain Mercer? The room went quiet. Colonel Williams cleared his throat. Captain Mercer has been temporarily reassigned to Fort Bliss pending an investigation into several incidents, not just what occurred with you. Multiple female officers have come forward since the incident, Dr. Jefferson added. Once one person speaks up, others find their courage. I hadn't expected that. In the tight-knit military community, speaking out against a superior officer was practically unheard of. The risk to one's career was too great. Will they face retaliation? I asked. Not if I have anything to say about it, Colonel Williams replied, his jaw set firmly. The military is changing, Monroe. Slowly, yes, but changing nonetheless. Major Jefferson leaned forward. The Jefferson program isn't just about veterans. It's about reshaping military culture, about honoring the values the uniform represents, not just the rank it displays. I thought about my 13 years of service, the sacrifices, the missed holidays, the relationships that couldn't withstand the distance. I thought about my father, who'd returned from Vietnam a shell of himself, unable to reconcile the horrors he'd seen with the life he was expected to lead. I thought about the veterans I read to every Thursday, their stories fading with each passing year. When would this start? I asked. 2 weeks, Dr. Jefferson replied. We'd need you in Washington for a brief orientation next week, then back here to begin implementation. I took a deep breath. I have conditions. Colonel Williams raised an eyebrow. Let's hear them. First, I want Lieutenant Rodriguez as my deputy. She has the administrative experience this program will need. Dr. Jefferson made a note. That can be arranged. Second, I want to continue my weekly shifts at the VA. That connection matters. Of course, Major Jefferson nodded approvingly. And third, I paused, knowing this was the big one. I want a civilian liaison position created for the program, someone who understands both military and civilian sectors. And I want to offer it to Sandra Mercer. The room went silent. Captain Mercer's wife? Colonel Williams asked incredulously. Ex-wife, I corrected. She's a social worker who specializes in veteran reintegration. She's been volunteering at the VA longer than I have, and she left him because of how he treated women under his command. I didn't mention that Sandra and I had become friends over the past 6 months, bonding over our shared frustration with the system. or that she had been the one who suggested I volunteer at the VA in the first place. Dr. Jefferson studied me for a moment, then smiled slowly. That's unexpected, but brilliant from an optics perspective. And substantively sound. It sends a message, I said simply, that you're not out for revenge. Major Jefferson nodded. That this is about building something, not tearing someone down. Exactly. The Pentagon liaison looked impressed. I think we can work with those conditions, Staff Sergeant. Or should I say Lieutenant Monroe? We spent the next hour going through logistics, timelines, and budget allocations. By the time we finished, the morning had turned to afternoon, and my future had shifted dramatically. As we prepared to leave, Major Jefferson asked to speak with me privately. The others filed out, leaving us alone in the colonel's office. My granddaughter is impressed with you, he said, his weathered hands resting on his cane. She doesn't impress easily. The feeling is mutual, sir. He nodded. There's something I need to tell you. Something personal. I waited, curious. My wife, Eleanor, was a military nurse in Vietnam. That's where we met. His eyes took on a faraway look. She was brilliant, compassionate, stronger than anyone I ever knew. But the military wasn't kind to women then. Her commanding officer... He paused, his jaw tightening. He was like Mercer? I guessed, worse, and I did nothing. I was a young officer, focused on my career. I heard rumors, saw how she'd come back to quarters sometimes with red eyes. But I never stood up for her, never risked my position to protect her dignity. I hadn't expected this confession, this vulnerability from a decorated war hero. She never held it against me, he continued. But I've held it against myself for 50 years. He looked at me directly. When I saw Mercer humiliating you on that parade ground, I saw my younger self standing silently by. I couldn't stay silent again, understanding dawned. This program isn't just about veterans, is it? It's about making amends, he admitted. For all the times good soldiers stayed silent when they should have spoken up. For all the Eleanor Jeffersons who served with honor, but weren't treated honorably. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. This belonged to her. She'd want you to have it. Inside was a simple silver pin, the caduceus symbol worn by military medical personnel. Sir, I can't accept this. You can and you will. His voice was gentle but firm. Not because you need it, but because I need to give it. Because somewhere Eleanor is watching, and she'd be proud to see what you're building here. As I left the office, the silver pin securely fastened inside my pocket, I felt the weight of both history and future pressing on me. The Jefferson program wasn't just an opportunity or a promotion, it was a reckoning, a chance to heal old wounds while preventing new ones. And for the first time in 13 years of service, I felt truly seen. The news of my promotion and the Jefferson program spread through Camp Resolute like wildfire. By the time I returned from Washington the following week, the base had divided itself into clear factions. Those who supported the changes, those who resented them, and those waiting to see which way the wind would blow. Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez met me at the airfield. Her usually serious face split with a rare grin. Lieutenant Monroe, she saluted with theatrical formality, then dropped it immediately to hug me. How does it feel to skip 4 ranks overnight? Terrifying, I admitted as we walked to her car. How bad is it here? Her expression sobered. Mixed. Colonel Williams has been supportive publicly. Most of the enlisted personnel are either excited or neutral. Some of the officers, though, let me guess, Mercer's friends? She nodded, sliding into the driver's seat. Captain Reynolds has been particularly vocal. Called it tokenism and political correctness gone mad at the officers' club last night. I wasn't surprised. Reynolds and Mercer had been friends since West Point. And the female officers? Watching carefully, Staff Sergeant Chen called me yesterday asking if the program was taking applications. Lieutenant Patterson wants to know if you'll mentor her. I smiled at that. Patterson was brilliant but shy, exactly the kind of officer who got overlooked in the current system. And what about you, Deputy Director Rodriguez? Ready to help me change military culture one veteran at a time? She laughed, pulling onto the main road. After what you did for Sandra Mercer? I'd follow you into combat, Riley. We drove past the main gate, where a new sign was being installed. Camp Resolute, home of the Jefferson Veteran Integration Program. Seeing it made everything suddenly real. We start on Monday, I said, mentally reviewing our timeline. 30 veterans arriving for orientation. 30 active duty personnel selected as partners. And about 5,000 ways this could all go wrong? Always the optimist, Maya quipped. I'm serious. We're not just starting a program. We're challenging decades of entrenched culture. People don't change easily, especially in the military. That's exactly why it has to be you leading this, she said, her voice suddenly earnest. You understand both sides. You respect tradition without being enslaved by it. We pulled up to the newly assigned program headquarters, a renovated building near the base entrance that had previously served as a storage facility. The transformation was remarkable. Fresh paint, new signage, and a wheelchair ramp leading to the entrance. Inside, Sandra Mercer was directing a team of enlisted personnel as they arranged furniture and equipment. Her face lit up when she saw us. There she is. She rushed over, embracing me warmly. The woman of the hour. At 45, Sandra radiated a calm competence that immediately put people at ease. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore civilian business attire with a visitor's badge clipped to her lapel. The place looks amazing, I said, taking in the open concept office. I was only gone a week. Colonel Williams expedited everything, Sandra explained. I think he's trying to prove his commitment to the program. Or cover his ass for allowing Mercer's behavior for so long, Maya muttered. Sandra's expression tightened slightly at the mention of her ex-husband, but she quickly recovered. Either way, we've benefited. Come see your office. She led us to a corner room with windows overlooking the parade ground, the same ground where I'd been humiliated just 2 weeks earlier. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Perfect view for keeping an eye on things, I noted. That's what I thought, Sandra smiled. Oh, and this arrived for you this morning. She handed me a heavy envelope bearing the Pentagon seal. Inside was a letter from the Secretary of Defense himself, expressing personal support for the Jefferson program and its mission to integrate the wisdom of our veterans with the energy of our active duty personnel, creating a more resilient and compassionate military culture. Below his signature was a handwritten note. Lieutenant Monroe Major Jefferson speaks highly of you. Don't let us down. J.M. Well, no pressure, I said, showing the note to Maya. Just the Secretary of Defense watching your every move, she laughed. Totally relaxing. Our banter was interrupted by a knock at the door. Captain James Reynolds stood in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. Lieutenant Monroe, he said, emphasizing my new rank slightly. I was hoping we could speak privately. Maya and Sandra exchanged glances. It's fine, I assured them. Captain Reynolds and I are old friends. They left reluctantly, closing the door behind them. Reynolds remained standing, his posture rigid. Congratulations on the promotion, he said, though his tone conveyed anything but congratulations. Thank you. What can I do for you, Captain? He paced slowly, examining the office. Nice setup they've given you. Must be nice to bypass years of work with one well-timed complaint. I kept my voice level. Is there something specific you wanted to discuss? He stopped pacing and faced me directly. I want to know what your game is, Monroe. You've been here 13 years. Never complained before. Suddenly Major Jefferson shows up, and you're leveraging a stained uniform into a commission and your own program? The accusation stung, but I didn't let it show. I didn't ask for any of this, Reynolds. I was doing my job, volunteering my time, and trying to be a good soldier. And now? Now that you've gotten Mercer transferred and taken his position? Still just trying to be a good soldier? Captain Mercer's actions got him transferred, I corrected. And this isn't his position. It's a new initiative entirely. Reynolds leaned forward, placing his hands on my desk. Listen carefully. There are a lot of people on this base who don't appreciate how this went down. People who believe the military should promote based on merit, not demographic checkboxes. I stood, matching his posture. My record speaks for itself. 3 tours, commendations for leadership under fire, 13 years of exemplary service. If you want to talk merit, Captain, I'm happy to compare notes. He straightened, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. The Veterans Program is a PR stunt. It won't last. And when it fails, there will be consequences. Is that a threat? An observation, he moved toward the door. Change is hard, Monroe, especially when it's forced down people's throats by Washington suits who've never seen combat. As he reached for the doorknob, I called after him. Captain Reynolds, he paused. Your name is on my list of officer liaisons for the program. I put it there personally, despite objections, because I believe you care about this institution as much as I do. He turned, surprise evident on his face. This isn't about taking sides, I continued. It's about making the military better for everyone who serves, including you. For a moment, something like respect flickered in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual guardedness. Monday morning, 0700, he said. I'll be here. After he left, Maya and Sandra reappeared immediately. What was that about? Maya demanded. I sighed, sinking into my chair. The first skirmish in what's going to be a very long war. Sandra placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. You handled it perfectly. Firm but conciliatory. We'll see, I said. Reynolds represents at least a third of the officer corps here. If they actively resist the program, then we'll adapt, Maya finished. That's what soldiers do. I looked down at my new uniform, the lieutenant bars still feeling foreign on my shoulders. The uniform no longer carried yesterday's stain, but it carried something else now, the weight of expectation, of hope, of possibility, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if my shoulders were broad enough to bear it. Monday arrived with all the subtlety of an artillery strike. By 0600, I was already in my office reviewing the day's schedule for the 30th time. 30 veterans would arrive at 0800, followed by an orientation session, partner assignments, and a welcome luncheon. On paper, it looked manageable. In reality, it felt like preparing for a high-stakes operation with untested equipment. You're going to wear a hole in that floor, Maya commented, leaning against the doorframe with 2 coffee cups in hand. I accepted one gratefully. Just making sure we haven't missed anything. We've triple-checked everything. The veterans' quarters are ready, the partnerships are assigned, and Colonel Williams is prepared to give his blessing. She sat across from me. What's really bothering you? I sighed. What if Reynolds is right? What if this is just a PR stunt that's doomed to fail? Then we fail spectacularly and with dignity, she replied without hesitation. But that's not going to happen. Before I could respond, Sandra appeared in the doorway, her expression tense. We have a situation. My stomach dropped. What kind of situation? The bus from the VA center is here early, but that's not the problem. She hesitated. Captain Reynolds and 4 other officers are blocking the entrance, demanding to inspect the veterans' credentials and paperwork before allowing them inside. They can't do that, Maya snapped. That's not protocol. They know, Sandra said grimly. They're creating a bottleneck deliberately. The veterans are standing in the sun while Reynolds claims he's ensuring base security. I was already moving. Where's Colonel Williams? In a meeting with the base inspector. Unreachable for at least an hour. Perfect timing. This was no coincidence. The scene at the main gate was exactly as Sandra had described. A bus idled while 30 veterans, many elderly, some in wheelchairs, waited in the morning heat. Captain Reynolds and his cohort stood blocking the entry checkpoint, examining papers with exaggerated thoroughness. Major Jefferson was there too, his face flushed with anger as he argued with Reynolds. This is outrageous, he was saying as I approached. These men and women have proper clearance. I arranged it personally. Protocol, Major, Reynolds replied smoothly. In these times, we can't be too careful about who enters a military installation. I stepped forward. Captain Reynolds, he turned, feigning surprise. Lieutenant Monroe. We're just conducting standard security checks. No, you're not, I said evenly. You're creating an unnecessary delay to undermine the program's first day. He started to protest, but I cut him off. As program director, I'm overriding your security concern. These veterans have been pre-cleared by the Pentagon. Their paperwork was processed last week. Regulations state that the officer on duty I interrupted, pulling out my phone. I have a direct line to General Harris at the Pentagon, who oversees base security protocols. Should I call and clarify whose authority supersedes whose in this situation? I was bluffing. I had no such number. But Reynolds didn't know that. His eyes narrowed. That won't be necessary, Lieutenant. He turned to his colleagues. Let them through. As the veterans began filing past the checkpoint, I approached Major Jefferson, who looked simultaneously furious and impressed. That was well handled, he said quietly. Though I suspect this is just the opening salvo. I know, I replied, helping an elderly woman with her bag. But we need to get through today. Tomorrow's problems can wait until tomorrow. Despite the rocky start, the orientation proceeded smoothly. The veterans ranging from Vietnam-era soldiers to recently discharged Afghanistan veterans brought an energy to the room that was palpable. They weren't just participants. They were pioneers in a program that could reshape military culture. I watched from the podium as they interacted with their active duty partners, sharing stories, comparing experiences across generations. Even some of Reynolds's reluctant officers seemed to be warming to their veteran counterparts. "Your instincts were right," Sandra whispered beside me. "This is working," it was, but I knew better than to celebrate too early. Reynolds's stunt at the gate was just the beginning. There would be more resistance, more obstacles, more attempts to prove the program and, by extension, me unworthy. The luncheon was in full swing when Colonel Williams finally appeared, scanning the room before approaching me. "I hear there was an incident at the gate," he said without preamble. "Handled, sir, so I've been told." He studied me. "Reynolds is testing you. He won't be the last." "I'm aware, sir," he nodded, apparently satisfied. "The Secretary of Defense called this morning. He's planning to visit next month to assess the program personally." My heart skipped. "That's soon." "Progress doesn't wait for convenience, Lieutenant." He glanced around the room. "Based on what I'm seeing, you're off to a strong start. Keep it up." As he moved away to greet the veterans, I felt a momentary surge of confidence. We'd overcome the first hurdle. Maybe this could work after all. That confidence lasted until evening, when I returned to my quarters to find a note slipped under my door. Inside was a photoshopped image of me in uniform, the entire garment covered in stains with the caption, "Some stains don't wash out." I crumpled the paper, my hand trembling slightly. The juvenile tactic shouldn't have bothered me, but it did not because of the threat it implied, but because it meant someone on base was willing to go beyond professional disagreement to personal intimidation. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Emergency. Program office. Now." I raced back, finding Maya and Sandra waiting with grim expressions. "Someone accessed our system," Maya explained, pointing to her laptop. "The veteran officer partnerships have been scrambled. The housing assignments, too? Everything we carefully arranged. Can you fix it?" I asked, already working on it. "But that's not all," she hesitated. "They left a message in the system logs. First warning." Sandra looked shaken. "Who would do this?" "It's sabotage, pure and simple." I thought of the note in my quarters, of Reynolds' smug expression at the gate, of the countless officers who resented my promotion and this program. "It could be anyone," I said. "Or several someones." "We should report this to Colonel Williams," Sandra urged. I considered it. A formal complaint would trigger an investigation, create a paper trail. But it would also play into our opponent's hands, making the program appear troubled from day one. Not yet, I decided. "Maya, can you restore the system by morning?" She nodded. I backed everything up, anticipating something like this. "But I'll need all night. Do it. And install whatever security measures you can to prevent a repeat." "What about the warning?" Sandra asked. "This is serious, Riley. I know." I showed them the note from my quarters. "They're trying to rattle us, to make us look weak and incapable. We can't give them that satisfaction." As they worked through the night to restore our systems, I sat at my desk, staring at the crumpled note. The crude attempt at intimidation had failed. I wasn't afraid. But I was concerned about how far our opponents might go to sabotage the program. By dawn, Maya had restored everything and added additional security protocols. The partnerships and housing assignments were back in place, and no one outside our small circle knew what had happened. As the first light of morning filtered through my office windows, I realized something important. This wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't even just about changing military culture. It was about proving that integrity and perseverance could overcome entrenched resistance, that what was right could triumph over what was comfortable. I pinned Eleanor Jefferson's caduceus to the inside of my uniform jacket, close to my heart but hidden from view, a private reminder of why this battle mattered. The war for Camp Resolute's soul had begun. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of small victories and constant vigilance. Despite continued resistance scheduling errors that left rooms double-booked, supply requisitions that mysteriously disappeared, rumors that spread like wildfire, the Jefferson program was gaining traction. Veterans and their military partners were developing genuine connections. Workshops on combat stress, leadership under pressure, and transitional challenges were consistently full. Even some initial skeptics among the officer corps had begun to participate, drawn by the undeniable value of the veterans' experience. I was reviewing participant feedback forms when a knock came at my office door. To my surprise, Captain Reynolds stood there looking uncomfortable. "Captain?" I acknowledged, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "What can I do for you?" He remained standing. "I want to speak with you about an incident." My guard immediately went up. "What incident?" "Not one that's happened. One that might?" He glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers, then closed the door. "There's a group of officers planning something during the secretary's visit next week. Something designed to embarrass you and discredit the program." I studied his face, looking for deception. "Why are you telling me this?" "You've made your opposition to the program quite clear." He ran a hand through his short hair, a rare display of uncertainty from a usually composed officer. "My veteran partner is Colonel Frank Mitchell. Vietnam, 2 Purple Hearts, Bronze Star." I knew Colonel Mitchell a tough, no-nonsense veteran who'd initially seemed an unlikely match for Reynolds. "He's been telling me stories," Reynolds continued. "About his time in country, about the female nurses and officers who saved his life multiple times, about how they never got the recognition they deserved." He paused. "He showed me pictures of his daughter. She joined the army following his footsteps. Left after 2 years because of harassment from her commanding officer." I waited, sensing there was more. "I've been part of the problem," he admitted finally. "Not actively, but passively. Going along with jokes, turning a blind eye. Colonel Mitchell made me see that." "What exactly is being planned?" I asked, still wary of a trap. "During the secretary's tour, someone's going to plant evidence suggesting the program is faking its success metrics. Doctored satisfaction surveys, manipulated attendance numbers. They've accessed your reporting system." Maya's additional security measures had apparently been insufficient. "Who's behind it?" "I can't say for certain, but Major Lawson is involved, and possibly Lieutenant Colonel Weber." Weber was Mercer's former commanding officer and one of the people who had enabled his behavior for years. "This went higher than I'd realized. Why should I believe you?" I asked bluntly. 2 weeks ago, you were blocking veterans at the gate. Because despite what you think of me, I believe in this institution." His voice hardened. "And what they're planning crosses a line. It's not just about stopping your program anymore. It's about deliberately sabotaging something that's actually helping soldiers." "I've seen it firsthand," I considered his words. Reynolds was ambitious, politically savvy, and traditionally minded, but he'd never struck me as dishonest. If he was coming to me with this information, he must truly believe the planned sabotage went too far. "What do you suggest?" I asked. "Set a trap?" "Feed false information about where the sensitive data is stored. When they access it, you'll have proof of who's involved." It was a good plan, assuming Reynolds himself wasn't part of a more elaborate deception. "I'll consider it," I said noncommittally. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention." After he left, I immediately called Maya and Sandra to my office, relating the conversation. "It could be legitimate," Maya conceded after hearing the story. "Reynolds has been different lately. Less antagonistic." "Or it could be misdirection," Sandra cautioned. "Getting us to focus on a fake threat while the real one slips past." "Either way, we need to strengthen our security," I decided. "And I think it's time to involve Colonel Williams." The colonel listened gravely to our concerns, his expression darkening as I detailed Reynolds' warning. "If senior officers are involved in deliberate sabotage, that goes beyond professional disagreement," he said. "That's potentially a criminal matter." "We don't have proof yet," I reminded him. "Then get some." His tone was uncompromising. "Set your trap, Lieutenant. I'll have base cybersecurity standing by to document any unauthorized access." We spent the next day creating a convincing decoy, a folder of confidential program, assessments prominently displayed on our main server but actually housed on a secure monitored system. Then we waited. The attack came at 0200, registered meticulously by base security's monitoring systems. The perpetrator used Major Lawson's credentials but accessed the system from Lieutenant Colonel Weber's office computer. By 0600, both officers had been summoned to Colonel Williams' office. By 0700, they were being escorted off base by military police. When I arrived at program headquarters, the base was buzzing with the news. Captain Reynolds was waiting outside my office. "You didn't mention you were involving base security," he said quietly. "I didn't know if I could trust you," I replied honestly. He nodded. "Accepting this. Fair enough. For what it's worth, I'm glad they were caught. This has gone too far." "Why the change of heart, Reynolds?" "Really?" He considered the question. "My father was career military. 30 years retired as a colonel. He always taught me that the uniform stands for something beyond the person wearing it." He met my eyes directly. I didn't agree with how you got your commission. Still don't, if I'm honest. But what you're doing with it, that honors the uniform. It was perhaps the most genuine thing he'd ever said to me. The secretary arrives tomorrow, I said. With Weber and Lawson gone, do you think the resistance will die down? No, he replied immediately. But it will be more cautious. Less coordinated, he hesitated. I'd like to help if you'll let me. Help how? I know which officers are still opposed. Which ones might cause problems tomorrow. Let me run interference. I studied him, searching for any sign of deception. Why would you do that? Because Colonel Mitchell asked me what kind of officer I want to be remembered as. His expression was solemn. And I realized I didn't like the answer. The secretary's visit the next day went flawlessly. He toured the facilities, spoke with veterans and their military partners, and witnessed firsthand the program's impact. True to his word, Reynolds managed potential troublemakers, steering them away from sensitive areas and keeping conversations positive. At the conclusion of the tour, the secretary addressed the assembled participants in the main hall. What I've seen today at Camp Resolute gives me hope for the future of our military, he declared. The Jefferson program represents the best of what we can be, honoring our past while evolving for the challenges ahead. He turned to me. Lieutenant Monroe, the Pentagon will be watching this program closely, not to find fault, but to learn how we can replicate its success across all branches of service. The applause that followed wasn't universal, but it was substantial. Even some former skeptics joined in, won over by the undeniable results of the past weeks. As the crowd dispersed, Major Jefferson approached, leaning heavily on his cane but beaming with pride. My Eleanor would have loved this, he said softly. Not just the program itself, but seeing you lead it. Seeing what you've overcome. I touched the hidden caduceus pinned inside my jacket. I couldn't have done it without you, sir. Nonsense. You'd have found your way eventually? He gazed around the room. But I'm glad I could speed things along a bit. In that moment, surrounded by veterans and soldiers united in purpose, I realized something profound. The stain that had once marked my uniform with shame had become the catalyst for transformation. Not just for me, but for Camp Resolute itself. Some stains, it seemed, didn't need to wash out. They just needed to be understood for what they truly were. Badges of honor earned in service to something greater than oneself. 6 months after the secretary's visit, Camp Resolute had transformed. The Jefferson program had expanded from 30 veterans to over 100, with a waiting list twice that length. Military bases across the country were implementing similar initiatives, using our framework as a template. But the most profound changes were cultural. The mentoring relationships between veterans and active duty personnel had created a new atmosphere of accountability and respect. Incidents of harassment had decreased by 60%. Retention rates for female officers had improved. Even the most resistant elements of the old guard had begun to adapt, some grudgingly, others with surprising enthusiasm. I was reviewing our quarterly report when Maya burst into my office. Her face tense. Captain Mercer is back, she announced without preamble. My stomach dropped. What? His investigation wasn't supposed to conclude for another month. Apparently it wrapped early. He's been cleared of the most serious charges and reassigned here, not to his previous position, but as logistics coordinator for the Eastern Sector. I sat back, processing this news. Who authorized this? General Harmon at Fort Bliss. Mercer has connections there. Maya crossed her arms. He's already on base meeting with Colonel Williams. The news shouldn't have rattled me, but it did. Despite everything we'd accomplished, despite my promotion and the program's success, the thought of facing Mercer again brought back the humiliation of that day on the parade ground. What are you going to do? Maya asked. Before I could answer, my phone rang. Colonel Williams's office requesting my immediate presence. The walk to headquarters felt interminable. I'd spent months building something meaningful, changing the culture of Camp Resolute inch by hard-won inch. Now the man who had tried to destroy my dignity was back, potentially threatening everything we'd achieved. Colonel Williams was alone when I entered his office, his expression grave. Lieutenant Monroe. Thank you for coming promptly. Sir, I understand Captain Mercer has returned to base. He nodded. The investigation found insufficient evidence for a court-martial, but enough for administrative discipline. He's been denied promotion for 2 years and reassigned to a position with minimal personnel authority. With all due respect, sir, why here? Why bring him back to Camp Resolute? The colonel sighed. It wasn't my choice, General Harmon insisted, citing Mercer's technical expertise and previous history with the base. He studied me carefully. I fought it, but was overruled. I maintained my professional demeanor, though inside I was seething. I see, sir. How would you like me to proceed? That's entirely up to you, Lieutenant. The Jefferson program operates independently. You're not required to coordinate with logistics unless you choose to. In other words, I could avoid Mercer entirely if I wanted. The thought was tempting. Is there anything else, sir? Yes, he hesitated. Captain Mercer has requested a meeting with you. I told him I would pass along the request, but that the decision was yours. My immediate instinct was to refuse. What could Mercer possibly have to say that I needed to hear? I'll consider it, sir. As I left headquarters, my mind raced with possibilities. Mercer's return felt like a test of how far I'd come, of whether the changes at Camp Resolute were superficial or substantive. Avoiding him would be easier, safer. But it would also signal that I still feared his power to hurt me. I found myself walking toward the Eastern Sector Administrative Building before I'd consciously made a decision. If Mercer wanted to meet, we would meet, but on my terms, in my space. I sent a text. Captain Mercer, Jefferson Program Headquarters, 1600 hours today. His reply came almost immediately. Confirmed. I spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing our latest initiatives, deliberately immersing myself in the evidence of what we'd built. By the time 1600 hours arrived, I was centered, grounded in the knowledge of what I had accomplished. Captain Derek Mercer entered precisely on time, his uniform impeccable as always. He looked thinner than I remembered, his face more lined. The investigation had clearly taken its toll. Lieutenant Monroe, he said, standing stiffly just inside my office door. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Have a seat, Captain. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, deliberately maintaining the formality of rank. He sat, his posture rigid. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I understand congratulations are in order, he finally said. The Jefferson program has been quite successful. It has, I agreed. Was there something specific you wanted to discuss? He cleared his throat. I wanted to clear the air. My return to Camp Resolute doesn't have to be uncomfortable for either of us. I'm not uncomfortable, Captain. The truth of this statement surprised me even as I said it. 6 months ago, the thought of facing Mercer again would have filled me with dread. Now, looking at him across my desk, I felt nothing but a calm certainty of my own worth. He shifted slightly. Good, that's good. Another pause. I also wanted to say that my behavior on the parade ground that day was inappropriate. The investigation made that clear. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was more than I'd expected. The investigation shouldn't have been necessary for that realization. Captain, his jaw tightened momentarily before he nodded. Perhaps not. I studied him, seeing beyond the practiced composure to the uncertainty beneath. Derek Mercer was a man whose identity had been built on a foundation of unearned authority and unquestioned privilege. That foundation had cracked, and he was still finding his footing on unfamiliar ground. Your ex-wife is doing exceptional work with the program, I said, changing tack. Her expertise in veteran reintegration has been invaluable. Something like genuine pain flashed across his face. Sandra always was brilliant. I'm glad she's found a place where that's recognized. The vulnerability in his voice was unexpected. For a brief moment, I glimpsed the man Sandra had once loved, before ambition and insecurity had hardened him into the officer who had humiliated me on the parade ground. Is there anything else, Captain? I have a meeting at 16:30, he straightened. Actually, yes. I've been reviewing the logistical challenges facing the Eastern Sector, particularly as they relate to the Jefferson program's expansion. I've identified several efficiency improvements that could benefit both departments. This was not where I'd expected the conversation to go. You've been here less than a day. I received the files last week as part of my transition briefing. He pulled a folder from his briefcase. If you're interested, I'd be happy to walk you through my recommendations. I hesitated, torn between lingering distrust and practical consideration. The program was expanding rapidly, and logistical support was a growing challenge. Leave the file, I decided. I'll review it and get back to you. He nodded, seeming relieved to have a concrete task to focus on. Of course. Take your time. As he stood to leave, I found myself asking the question that had been nagging at me since I heard of his return. "Why did you request this meeting, Captain?" "Really?" He paused at the door, his back to me. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. "Because you won," he said finally, turning to face me, "completely and deservedly, and I needed to see it for myself." After he left, I sat motionless, processing his words. There had been no anger in them, no resentment, just a simple acknowledgement of truth. I opened his folder, expecting to find superficial suggestions designed to reassert his relevance. Instead, I discovered a thorough analysis of our logistical challenges, with practical solutions that demonstrated both technical expertise and a surprising understanding of the program's goals. It was good work. Work that could help us grow more efficiently, serve more veterans, impact more lives. Later that evening, as I walked across the parade ground where my humiliation had once been on public display, I realized that the greatest victory wasn't in Mercer's acknowledgement or in the program's success. It was in my own transformation from a soldier who had accepted disrespect as the price of service to a leader who demanded better, not just for herself, but for everyone who wore the uniform. Some battles weren't won with force or revenge, but with the quiet persistence of dignity and truth. In the fading Texas sunlight, that knowledge felt like both armor and freedom. 1 year to the day after Captain Mercer had mocked my stained uniform, I stood again on the parade ground of Camp Resolute. This time I wasn't at attention in formation, but at a podium addressing the assembled base personnel, distinguished visitors, and media representatives. The Jefferson program began with a simple belief, I said, my voice carrying across the hushed crowd, that the wisdom of our veterans and the energy of our active duty personnel could create something greater than the sum of its parts. That by honoring our past, we could build a better future. In the front row sat Major Walter Jefferson in his wheelchair, his eyes bright with pride. Beside him, Dr. Camilla Jefferson smiled encouragingly. Beyond them were rows of veterans and their military partners, the heart and soul of the program that now served as a national model. Today, as we celebrate the program's first anniversary and its expansion to 15 bases nationwide, we're not just marking a successful initiative. We're witnessing a cultural transformation, one that recognizes that true strength comes not from rank or authority, but from mutual respect, shared purpose, and unwavering integrity. My gaze swept across the crowd, finding familiar faces. Maya Rodriguez, now a captain herself, heading the program's expansion team. Sandra Mercer, recently appointed to a Pentagon task force on military culture reform. Captain James Reynolds, who had become one of our most effective advocates among the traditional officer corps. And at the back, standing quietly alone, Captain Derek Mercer. Our professional relationship over the past 6 months had been cordial but distant. His logistical expertise had indeed proven valuable to the program, and he had been scrupulously respectful in all our interactions. Whether this represented genuine change or merely pragmatic adaptation, I couldn't say with certainty. But I had come to believe that people, like institutions, deserved the chance to evolve. The uniform we wear represents more than the individual who wears it, I continued. It represents a promise to our nation, to each other, and to ourselves. A promise that we will uphold the highest standards of service, sacrifice, and honor. I touched the silver caduceus pin now openly displayed on my uniform, Eleanor Jefferson's legacy, no longer hidden but worn with pride. Major Jefferson nodded slightly, acknowledging the gesture. Sometimes keeping that promise requires us to stand up when it would be easier to stay silent. To speak truth when others prefer comfortable lies. To recognize that the strength of our military lies not in rigid adherence to tradition, but in our capacity to grow while preserving what matters most. As I concluded my remarks and the ceremony transitioned to the ribbon cutting for the program's new permanent headquarters, I found myself momentarily alone. Colonel Williams had been promoted to general and transferred to the Pentagon to oversee the national implementation of the Jefferson model. His replacement, Colonel Maya Rodriguez, would assume command next week, the first woman to lead Camp Resolute in its history. "Quite a change from a year ago," said a familiar raspy voice behind me. I turned to find Major Jefferson, his granddaughter pushing his wheelchair. "Indeed it is." "Sir, Eleanor would be proud," he said, his weathered hand reaching for mine. "Not just of the program, but of you, of how you've carried her spirit forward." Dr. Jefferson smiled. "The secretary sends his regrets for missing today's ceremony. He's presenting the program proposal to our NATO allies next week. They're quite interested in implementing similar initiatives. From a stained uniform to an international model, I mused. Not the career path I envisioned. The best paths rarely are, Major Jefferson said wisely. They're the ones we find when we refuse to accept what's wrong with the world as it is. After the ceremony, I found myself drawn back to my office in the program headquarters. On my desk sat a small wrapped package that hadn't been there earlier. The card simply read, "For remembering." No signature. Inside was a shadow box containing a small square of fabric military issue, with a faint stain still visible. Beneath it, a simple inscription. Some stains are badges of honor. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Sandra Mercer had mentioned that her ex-husband was being transferred next week, a lateral move to Fort Lewis that he had apparently requested himself. The gesture was unexpected, almost confounding in its complexity. Was it an acknowledgement? An apology? A final attempt to rewrite our shared history? Perhaps it was all of those things. Or perhaps it was simply a man's recognition that some chapters needed to close before others could begin. I placed the shadow box on my shelf, neither hidden nor prominently displayed. A reminder, not of humiliation, but of transformation, his, mine, and Camp Resolute's. Later that evening, I found myself at the VA hospital, reading to veterans as I still did every Thursday. It was here, in these quiet moments of service, that I felt most connected to why I'd joined the military in the first place. Not for power or prestige, but to be part of something larger than myself, to serve those who had served. An elderly veteran I hadn't met before was wheeled in by a nurse. "Lieutenant Monroe?" he called out. "I've heard about you. About what you've built at Camp Resolute," I smiled. "It wasn't just me, sir. It took many hands. But it started with you," he insisted. "With one person refusing to accept disrespect as the status quo." He gestured to his wheelchair. "Some of us fight our battles on foreign soil. Others fight them right here at home. Both kinds of courage matter." As I drove back to base that night, the Texas stars brilliant overhead, I thought about courage in its many forms. The courage to serve. The courage to speak up. The courage to change. The courage to forgive others and yourself. My uniform no longer carried a stain from a leaking IV bag. But it carried something far more valuable, the invisible marks of a journey that had transformed not just my career, but my understanding of what it meant to truly honor the uniform. The next morning, as the sun rose over Camp Resolute, I stood at my office window watching new recruits cross the parade ground. Young men and women at the beginning of their military journeys, stepping into a culture that was still evolving but fundamentally different from the one I had entered 13 years ago. They wouldn't know my story, the public humiliation, Major Jefferson's intervention, the birth of a program that had changed military culture. They wouldn't need to. They would simply benefit from an environment where respect wasn't determined by rank, where service wasn't measured by gender, where the uniform represented not just authority, but responsibility. And in that moment, I understood the true measure of change. Not that my individual story would be remembered, but that it would never need to be repeated. Sometimes, the greatest acts of honor aren't found in medals or commendations, but in the quiet courage to stand tall even when brought low, and in doing so, to elevate not just yourself but everyone who follows.